Hey neighbors, it's Jonathan Rowland for tonight's Bible class. Been thinking a lot about what to speak on, and I decided to go with something that's been on my mind a lot. I've been talking about a particular topic with a buddy of mine for quite some time, and it's a relatively simple topic that we're all familiar with, but I want to uncover and kind of go into some of the details that we may have overlooked. I know I did, and I hope that this can just generate some action into what we're called to do as Christians. But first, let's have a time of prayer. I know that Brother Jesse is, last I heard, was feeling better, but still needs a lot of prayer for recuperation, as well as his wife, Sister Florabelle. Brother Tyrone Mitchell and Brother Art Richter are still needing prayer. I know there's many others that we've mentioned in the last several services, so let's just take a few moments here and go to the Lord for these people that need help. Yes, God, we fall before you today, Lord, and just ask for your mercy and grace, Lord, on our pastor and his wife, Lord, on the pillars of our church, God, and Brother Tyrone and Brother Art, Lord, and we just ask you to look over all the needs that have been called out here these last several days and weeks, Lord. There's so many that need your help, both spiritual and mental and physical, Lord, be it a healing or encouragement. God, we ask you just to lift them up, Lord, and to put us in a position that we can be a good witness for you, Lord, and to march forward and to be one that you can say, well done, good and faithful servant. In your name we ask, amen. So, you know me, I always need a water bottle. The topic I want to cover today is mentioned once in the Old Testament, but 8 times in the New Testament. And if you put it in a phrase, it is love your neighbor as yourself. Seems pretty simple, right? Well, Jesus turned this concept on its head when he gave the parable of the Good Samaritan. And if we miss the point he was driving at, and I have a feeling that there's a good chance some, if not a lot of us, miss the point of what it means to love your neighbor as yourself, then we miss one of the most important commands that we're given as children of God. Paul and James and Jesus himself cover this very important command, and all of them. And I've got a lot of notes here to go over. When I say we, the person I've been speaking with, we've covered a lot of ground in uncovering what looks like a simple subject. So I've got some notes to refer to here as we go along, but in Romans 13, 8 and 10, it tells us that loving your neighbor as yourself is the fulfillment of the law. James in 2 and 8 reiterates that and says, we fulfill the law by loving our neighbor as ourselves. And then Paul writes again to the Galatians, it's chapter 5 and verse 14, he says, all the law is fulfilled in one word. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. He says one word there, meaning love, but he's referring back to what Jesus, as we'll cover here in a minute, says is the second greatest commandment, which is to love your neighbor as yourself. So, not too many more important subjects that we can dwell upon than something that the whole law is wrapped around with loving your neighbor as yourself. So, I guess the first thing we need to cover is, what is a neighbor? Who is a neighbor? If we're talking about how the ancient Israelites looked at what a neighbor was, it was their fellow Jew. It was their countryman. The 10 Commandments, there are 2 that says we should not bear false witness against our neighbor. We should not covet our neighbor's house. So these are commands that are relevant to somebody that you know, right? A neighbor was somebody they were familiar with. And in just about every case, it related to their fellow countryman, a fellow Israelite, fellow Jew. Proverbs 3:28 says to not say to someone, to say to someone, go and come again tomorrow. You're not going to say that to a complete stranger. You're going to say that to somebody that you know, that you're familiar with. So coming up to the time of Jesus, when this lawyer asks him this question, the mindset as a neighbor is one that we already have an existing familiarity with. And so to get the real definition of how Jesus wants us to understand it, we have to go to the parable and break it down. And then after we break this parable down, we're going to look at different aspects of what Jesus brings out in giving that parable. It's in Luke 10. I've got things printed out here for save time for you guys, but turn to Luke 10, and it begins in verse 25. I might make some notes as I go as well. So it starts out, and he says, and behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tempted him. So we already see this attorney already had the wrong mindset, right? He says, Master, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Which is an interesting question for him to ask, and we can maybe cover that some other time. But Jesus said unto this lawyer, what is written in the law? How readest thou? And the lawyer answering said, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy strength, and with all thy mind. He's quoting there from Deuteronomy 6:9. And thy neighbor as thyself. And that comes from Leviticus 19:18. Remember I said it was mentioned one time in the New Testament? That's where it's mentioned, hidden away with, if you look at Leviticus 19, it's just kind of stuck in the middle of a lot of things that are going on. But this attorney, it's actually quite impressive. Sorry, I haven't had my allergy pill in a while, so I've got some drainage. But it's actually impressive that the lawyer picks up on the second commandment, because Jesus says, and he said unto the lawyer, thou hast answered right. This do, and thou shalt live. So this attorney picks up on the right answer, right? And Jesus tells him, you're right, but now do this. Verse 29, but he, the lawyer, willing to justify himself. So he's got a motive. It's not a good motive, is it? Willing to justify himself, said unto Jesus. Okay, so who's my neighbor, Jesus? The lawyer is seeking to diminish the scope of who is going to count as his neighbor. Now, this is an interesting question, because the lawyer should have already known that what his neighbor, who is included as being his neighbor. But he was looking for a restricting scope of who he's supposed to love as himself. It wasn't an expanding or opening mindset. Very limited. Sometimes we fall in that category. So Jesus, answering this question of who is my neighbor, gives him a parable. And the parable starts with this. It says, a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and fell among thieves, which stripped him of his raiment, stripped him of his clothes, and wounded him. He got beat up. And these thieves departed, leaving him half dead. So the Jericho road was a very treacherous road. It was very winding, meandering, perfect setup for ambushing. A lot of crimes happening on the Jericho road, and this is historical. You can check that out. But it was not a family safe road. You had to be on the lookout, and a lot of bad things happened there. So, and by chance, there came down a certain priest that way, a certain Jewish priest, And when this priest saw this wounded, which by the way was a fellow Israelite, he passed by on the other side. So his own countryman, his own neighbor, he passed by on the other side, not offering help. Verse 32, and likewise a Levite, when he was at the place, came and looked on him. He saw this fellow Jew beaten on the Jericho road and passed by on the other side. So the priest and the Levite on this road that's treacherous, it's not safe, they're thinking to themselves, okay, if I stop and help this man, what's going to happen to me? Am I going to befall the same thing that happened to this guy? So they take off. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was. And when he saw the man, he had compassion on him. So Jesus, in telling this parable with the Samaritan character, flips the question that the priest and the Levite were asking. He flips the question by saying, if I don't stop and help this man, what more is going to happen to him? So the difference is the Samaritan's not looking out for self. He's looking out for another. Whereas the Jews were looking out for themselves. Big difference in self and people outside of you. Inward versus outward. And so it says that he went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And on the morrow, when he departed, so he actually stayed with this injured Israelite, which, by the way, you know the conflict that Samaritans have with Jews, right? So Jesus is making another point, and we're going to bring that out here in a minute. And on the morrow, when he departed, he took out 2 pence and gave them to the host, and said unto him, take care of this man, and whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come back, I'll repay you. And then Jesus says, which now of these 3 thinkest thou was neighbor unto him that fell among the thieves? Note here that this Greek word that's used is in its adverb form here. Who was neighbor? And we'll touch on that in a minute too, about being neighborly. And the lawyer said, after hearing all of this, he says, he that showed mercy on him, and Jesus said unto him, go and do thou likewise. There's a lot to bring out here. So, like I said, these 2 Jews did not help their fellow countrymen, but a stranger who was despised of this one who was injured, and despised of the 2 who did not help, are the ones who, or is the one who helped the injured man. So, turn to Leviticus 19, and verse 18 is where the statement is made of love thy neighbor as thyself. But I think Jesus, because of the way he used this parable to teach this attorney about how he needs to treat people, he goes to a verse just below there, well, not just below, but it's in verse 34. And if you look at verse 34, Leviticus 19:34, and this just jumped off. I actually caught this on accident. I was looking for something else, and this caught my eye, and I thought, wow. So verse 34 says, the stranger that dwelleth with you shall be unto you as one born among you, and you shall love him as yourself. Now, putting that in a more modern terms, you shall treat the stranger as your neighbor, and you should love him as yourself. So everyone was familiar with, I guess by the time of the New Testament age, the love your neighbor as yourself was seen pretty significant. And it is. That's why it's mentioned eight times in the New Testament. But Jesus, I think, is aware of how we're supposed to treat people that aren't like us. They're different from us, right? And he's including a neighbor as one who's a stranger, and he's actually borrowing from the Jews' own law, their own book. And this is exactly what this Samaritan did, right? He's walking down the road, dangerous road. He's not looking out for himself. He sees who's essentially a stranger to him, right? This is not a Samaritan that's injured. This is a Jew who there's conflict with, deep conflict for years and years of built up hatred toward these two different groups of people. So not only is he a stranger, but he does love him as himself. He takes care of him. He takes him to the inn, stays the night with him, making sure he's fine. If it costs anything extra, I'll take care of it. So clearly, I think Jesus has this verse in mind when he's expanding how he wants them 2,000 years ago to see what a neighbor is, and how he wants us today, reading this 2 millennia later, what a neighbor is. Okay? So, here comes my notes here. So, Jesus is challenging their view of what a neighbor is. He's removing the boundaries, right? He's removing the boundaries of race. He's removing the boundaries of ethnicity. He's removing the boundaries of social status, okay? Because a lot of us fall into the trap, hopefully subconsciously. We're a product of our environment. We have a limited thinking on those that we feel comfortable in helping. Those that we feel comfortable in helping. And look, maybe you're watching this and you don't fall in this category, and that's great. Unfortunately, most of us probably do. So it's those who I'm talking to. So what Jesus is basically saying is the test of who your neighbor is shown by the way you treat someone who is different from you. Now, you probably have a lot of images coming up right now of the different ones that you've had the chance to help in the past, but because of the big separation of not wanting to get out of your comfort zone, that you didn't help, you know. And listen, I've fallen the same trap. I'm guilty as charged as well. But so Jesus is breaking the barriers of what a neighbor is. And he actually wants us to when he says go and do likewise, he's saying go and make neighbors. So here's the question. I wrote this question down. When did the Samaritan become a neighbor to the injured Jew? Because when the Samaritan was walking down the road and encountered this Jew, injured Jew, they weren't neighbors. But Jesus asked the attorney who was neighbor to the injured man. It wasn't the two that were already neighbors, right? The one that was neighbor to him was the Samaritan, who was a stranger. The Old Testament says that we're supposed to treat as one of our own countrymen or one like us and love them as ourselves. Do you see the point? So the Samaritan became a neighbor to the injured Jew only when he began a relationship with him, when he engaged with him. He became his neighbor by relating to him, and as the scripture says, when he showed and exercised compassion on this man. And that's what Jesus is trying to tell us, is go and make neighbors, go and love people, go and help people. I mean, look, we need to be careful on the ones that we choose, right? I mean, if you're on the streets of New York and you see someone beaten in the alleyway and you're with your family, you may want to take some caution before you decide to go help someone. So we have to look out for the household of our family first, and then scripture talks about the household of faith. But we're not, Jesus doesn't want to limit us in our comfort zone of fellow believers. Sorry, but that's the truth. He wants us to go out. I mean, that's why he says don't hide your light under a bushel. He wants it to shine to make a difference. This Samaritan made a difference in this Israelite's life. And I know it was a parable, but deep bond was created when this happened. Anyhow, stop from being excited. So who is our neighbor? So let's back up and let's rewind. I know I'm talking loud. I'm getting excited about this. So the word neighbor is from the Greek word plesion, P-L-E-S-I-O-N, plesion. And it has a strict meaning of near, close. It also could be understood as being neighboring. So the seafood restaurant is near the pier, or Germany neighbors France. Both of them are talking about proximity. There's different ways of talking about. That's why when you say, that's my neighbor, it's because they're in the same locale, they're in the same proximity. It's all about geographical, okay? And typically with the Jews, your fellow Jews lived amongst one another with your different tribes, and those were your neighbors. So in ancient times, and really even today in agricultural surroundings, neighbors were usually very nice to one another because they depended on one another for survival. That's where we get the idea of being neighborly. Being neighborly is a word that's synonymous with being friendly, because neighbors were very friendly with each other because everyone helped each other out so they could survive, right? They didn't have modern advancements that we have today. I mean, you were pretty much in survival mode all the way up to the Age of Renaissance, when things excelled and you didn't have to live off the land as much as they did back then. So that's where we get the word neighborly. At some point, the word neighbor took on a relationship quality. As an example, right? I can say that Steve Richter and I are close. And when I say that, I don't mean that Steve Richter and I are close because we're physically in the same proximity with one another, which would be a true statement when we're close together, naturally speaking. But when I tell you that Brother Steve and I are close, all of you know what I'm talking about. We have a close relationship. We have a bond, right? I mean, and all of you have people that you're close to. I just picked Steve as a example. When you go through things, when you have experiences in life together, you're close to someone, right? So it's a relational aspect of what a neighbor is. So Jesus, this is what he's teaching us. A neighbor isn't just one that you're close to geographically, right? But it's also one that you're close to via relationship, right? So it's one that you're near to, and one that you have a relationship with. So Jesus's point is, like I said, that Samaritan wasn't in the same proximity, and he surely didn't have a relationship with this stranger. Well, when he came upon him, he was in the same proximity, but he wasn't neighbor to him until he began a relationship, when he began relating, when he engaged himself, when he displayed love to this stranger. Right, so if we have an opportunity to provide help, to provide love, Jesus is essentially telling us that it's part of our Christian duty, part of our responsibility, maybe not in each and every case because individual circumstances vary, but it's on us to go and make neighbors. It's on us to look for opportunities to shine our light, right? And that's not necessarily always sitting down trying to witness somebody to accept Christ, which you need to do. That's shining your light. But shining your light is your manner of conversation, right? The way you live your life, and displaying love to those outside of your comfort zone of what a neighbor is. is the example that he used to answer the attorney's question of who is my neighbor. So Jonathan, who's your neighbor? Well, Jesus said it was a complete stranger that I'm going to help, that I'm going to go and make a neighbor by showing love as I love myself. Okay. Hope this is making sense so far. The question is, how do we love, this is the next question, how do we love our neighbors as ourselves? How do we love a stranger neighbor as ourselves? So the lawyer answered the question by saying, what's the greatest commandment? Loving God with all your heart, soul, and mind and body, right? Deuteronomy 6:5. And then he adds on your neighbor as yourself, Leviticus 19:18. Turn to Matthew 22:36 and 40. Matthew 22:36 through 40. Jesus is talking to a different attorney. I apologize when you're going to hear a phone ring. I'm at my mom's house and somebody's trying to reach her. They're not here. He's talking to a different lawyer who had the wrong motives as well. And he tells this attorney that the greatest commandment is to love God with your heart. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. So different attorney with also wrong motives. And he tells him the greatest commandment is the first thing the attorney said in the Samaritan parable encounter. And then Jesus says the second greatest commandment is the second statement that this attorney gave at the Samaritan parable. Pretty neat coincidence that the attorney gave the answer that was the greatest commandment, and then his answer also included the second greatest commandment. That needs to be dissected too at another time. But turn to Matthew 7 and 12. This is what I'm driving at. Jesus here gives what many refer to and call the golden rule. And it essentially says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Or treat people the way that you would like them to treat you. And this, I think, Jesus' mind, the greatest mind ever walked the earth, right? So he's thinking of these things as he's answering who a neighbor is and to love your neighbor as yourself. The way to do that is to do unto others, right? Don't just say it, do it. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? That Samaritan's looking at this injured man who probably self-identified as an Israelite, but the Samaritan did unto this injured Jew as the Samaritan would have wanted this Jew to do unto him as he lay there beaten, probably knocked out. Even though the Jew was a foreigner to him, he would still want that to happen to him because, listen, when you're hurt and beaten in trouble, for most people, all bets are off and you want help. So if I see someone in that condition and have no idea who they are, listen, it's on me, especially as a child of God, to give that man need. Now, take precaution if I'm with my family or in different circumstances, but we have to have a heart of helping. We have to have a heart that looks outside of us and takes it off of self and puts it onto others because we're loving them as ourselves. So I just love that do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That answers the question of how do we love others as ourselves. Our love to God, right? The greatest commandment. Now, watch this. The greatest commandment is to love God with our whole heart, body, soul, and mind. All our strength. Yeah, but that's invisible, right? We can't display that because God's not here, not physically around us, that we can do something to show that love. So how do we show our love to God? that only manifests itself when we love others as ourselves. When we love others as ourselves, we are showing God that we love him with all of our mind, soul, strength, body. That's when it becomes a reality. When we demonstrate to God that we love him, we're doing love to someone else. We're taking it off of us and putting it on someone else. Matthew 25:40, he says, inasmuch as you have done it to the least of these, what's that? Fed, visited, clothed, sheltered. You've done so unto me. Inasmuch as you love others as yourself, you're loving me. It all just dovetails together. And like I said, listen, I haven't really had all this click before, and I hope it's clicking for you. Because remember, this is not a suggestion. Jesus says to us to go and do likewise, to go and make neighbors. When you're in the proximity of someone that needs help, develop a relationship, develop a bond, help them, engage with them. It's a mistake for us to say, well, they're not part of the body of Christ, so no. That's called stinking thinking, right? That's not shining your light. That's keeping it us four and no more. We've got to go beyond that. And we have to help those that are in need. Not because I'm saying it, but because Jesus commands it. Okay, so how can we make neighbors? How can we make neighbors? All of you know, I announced it publicly a couple of weeks ago that I turned 50 recently, right? Well, those that are, say, 10 years younger than me, and those that are 10 years older than me, so those that are between 40 and 60, you're going to relate to what I'm about ready to say. And probably those that were parents of kids who were this young. So I grew up in the 70s. And in the 70s, there were some really good shows. One of them was Sesame Street. Fantastic show. Electric Company was another one. These were on PBS. These shows were really neat because it helped my mom. Didn't have to watch me as often, right? Like, we didn't have YouTube. We didn't have cell phones. It'd turn on a kiddie show immediately and take my attention so I didn't start crying, which are great tools today to help people with small children. But back then we didn't have that. So I watched Sesame Street and I watched Electric Company, and they were very entertaining for me. They engaged with me and they were entertaining. But there was another show that it didn't entertain me, but it impacted me. In the 70s, when I'm 6, 7, 8, 9, I turned 10 in 1981. But this show was called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And listen, I know a lot of you just now are thinking, right? You're having memories of the same exact thing. Mr. Rogers was a genuine, kind individual. And I'm sitting there watching this TV screen, and at that age, I'm not cognitive enough to realize that I'm looking at a TV and this man's really not talking to me. But he knew a way to make neighbors. You know the famous song, Won't You Be My Neighbor? He would talk to me, and a lot of you that are watching this, and he would connect, right? He wouldn't talk down to you, he would talk to you and hit on things that connected, that you learned. And he was a father figure, right? And he didn't... He genuinely cared, right? And he was what's it called? He was an ordained minister. And just before he was going to go start his work in the ministry, he found out about TV and saw how it was not being used right. And people throwing pies in each other's face and not teaching good examples. And he decided to put his ministry off, and he did a TV ministry where he helped millions and millions of children. And one of his, well, this was the only steps for success that he ever gave. And if you look now, you can buy them on a t-shirt. But he had 3 steps for success. The first one I think is the most important. Well, they're all important, but the first one was be kind. So the first step of success is to be kind. Pretty easy to remember. The second step to success was be kind. And the third step for the success that a person can attain to is to be kind. So those 3 steps are be kind, be kind, be kind. And that was Mr. Fred Rogers' keys to being successful in life. And look, he's right, isn't he? I mean, we look to find success in a lot of materialistic things, and I get it. Believe me, I get it. We have to advance in different ways, materially and naturally for survival, but we can get stuck in looking too far in that area of success that we lose sight of what we're called to do as Christians. What we're called to do is to make neighbors. We're called to love others as ourselves. We're called to make a difference. And the way you do that, I can't see any other better way than what Mr. Rogers suggested, which is to be kind, be kind, be kind. I mean, different ways we can do it. I mean, listen, you can make a list right now, right? Words of encouragement. How about giving people the benefit of the doubt? Hey, Jonathan, how about you give somebody the benefit of the doubt before you start thinking a certain way about them? Okay, I'll try that more. Showing grace to people. How about showing grace, right? Do what the Good Samaritan did. Be compassionate. Exercise compassion on someone. Philippians 2 and 4. Turn that real quick. Philippians 2 and 4 is a great example of this. I just want to read it. It's very short, but I just want to read it. Look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of what? The things of others. Look out for the well-being of other people, right? Take up this. This is not new, right? It's just things that need to be brought to our attention. Look not only on yourself, but look on the things of others. This is by serving others, and this is also forgiving, right? Being kind is to be forgiving. So just some conclusions here. I apologize for the phone ringing. Jesus is essentially telling us to expand our neighborhood, right? Jonathan, I've got my own personal neighborhood, right? And trust me, before I started studying this, my neighborhood had a defined boundary. I mean, it was people that I'm familiar with, people that I've got relationships, already existing relationships with. We all have our neighborhood. Jesus is telling us to expand that neighborhood and go and make neighbors, right? We don't need to necessarily walk up to a stranger and start singing, "Won't you be my neighbor?" But that's the point Mr. Rogers was making. He's reaching out, expanding his neighborhood, reaching out to kids, letting them know that there's somebody out there that cares about you. Why can't we do the same? Why can't we go out and let people know that we care about them? You know, you can let a complete stranger, you can let a homeless man know that you care about them. Don't necessarily give them money, because a lot of them maybe are going to use it for things that aren't good. But regardless of their condition, how about buying them a meal? How about doing things that'll make a difference? You know, we're all guilty of it, and we can all do better at it. So we have 2 neighbor commands, and like you to, if you haven't written anything down yet, I'd like you to write this down. 2 neighbor commandments. Number 1, we are to love the neighbors we already have as ourselves. So before you hit play, and if you're still watching, you have neighbors right now. You have neighbors, not necessarily where you live, but Steve Richter and I, we're neighbors, right? We've got an existing relationship, right? We're in the same household of faith. He's my neighbor. And I'm to love him as myself. I'm to be compassionate towards my friend, towards my neighbor. I need to do that more to all my neighbors, to all those that are close to me. And we do this by doing unto others as we would have them do unto ourselves. That's how we do it, right? If you just flip it, it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. The second commandment we're given, right? Don't forget the first one. We have to do that. Love the neighbors we already have as ourselves. And the second one is to go and make new neighbors by helping those in our proximity who are in need. This is exactly what the Good Samaritan did, right? He got into the proximity of someone who was in need, and he was neighbor to him. This is Jesus's point. He doesn't want us to just love one another, household of faith. He wants us to go and do likewise, to go and do likewise to others that we encounter that are in need of help. So go and make new neighbors by helping those that we come across who are in need. That's how we make neighbors, right? And of course, we do this by doing unto them as we would have them do unto us. Again, the Good Samaritan example. And when we do this, we are loving them as ourselves. Okay, so those are the 2 neighbor commands. And that's basically what I want you to get out of this, is to realize Jesus has expanded what it means to be a neighbor, to be neighbor. And he wants us to expand our neighborhood. He wants it to be a beautiful day in the neighborhood for us. Because when we're shining the light of Christ, it's a beautiful thing. That's why it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood as a Christian, because we're supposed to have our light shining, right? It's not a cloudy day in the neighborhood. It needs to be a shiny day in the neighborhood. So as I was putting this together, I just want to give a quick callback to something I talked on months ago about OPM, Other People Matter. As I was putting this together, I recall back to that. Other people matter, right? I mean, I know I matter to God, but to God, other people matter, and we need to be a tool. We need to be a vessel of honor in doing unto others as we would want them to do unto us, by making a difference, right? Other people matter, and expanding our realm of help outside of the household of faith is biblical. It's Jesus, right? It's his commandment. They write about it over and over again in the New Testament, right? Jesus didn't tell the lawyer who a neighbor was. He told him to go and make neighbors. So, last thing I want to talk on is a story of a lot of impact in what I've talked about today. Okay, so one day there was a man walking along a beach, a long, long beach, and there were hundreds, if not thousands, of starfish all over this beach who had been stuck on the sand when the tide went out. And he's looking out and he sees this little boy picking up one of these starfish and carefully slinging it into the water. And he's watching him do this a couple of times, and he walks up to the boy and he says, "Young man, what are you doing?" And the boy says, "Well, mister, I'm throwing some starfish, these starfish back into the ocean, because if I don't, they're going to die because the tide's gone and they're not going to make it." And the man says, young man, this beach goes for miles, and there's literally hundreds of thousands of potential starfish on this beach. How do you possibly think you're going to make a difference? And the boy looks up to the man, pauses, walks over and picks up a starfish, throws it in the ocean, turns back to the man, and he said, I made a difference in that starfish. Look, there's a lot of people in the world that need compassion, need help, far more than we're ever going to be able to help, right? But you can help some. You can help people. Can't help them all, but you can make a difference. And so what Jesus is telling us is to go make neighbors. And we do that by tossing one starfish at a time. So I hope this has connected. I hope that it spurred some action. I really hope it affects me and I begin doing more of what I've just talked to you about. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon.